Hello and welcome. You're watching Oneindia News. This is our weekly show, Global Chit Chat, where we discuss the top geopolitical development in the recent weeks with our guest and expert, Mr. Tritivesh Singh Maini. Hello, sir. Welcome back to our show.
Thank you, Shravani.
So let's just jump right into it. Recently, Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and Iran's president Ibrahim Raisi signed a 20-year cooperation deal. So this comes after Iran sent tankers to Venezuela, and also it comes amid the collapse of the Iran nuclear talks. So tell us, why is this development very important in the political sphere, in geopolitical sphere?
Okay, so just a couple of things. First of all, the talks with regard to the Iran nuclear deal have not quite collapsed, but the prospects for the revival now seem rather dim now. Given the differences over the removal of surveillance cameras, the fact that Iran also has conditions, vis-a-vis the other signatories. So those prospects are dim. Now, why is this important? A couple of things. First of all, both, Iran and Venezuela have been dealing with sanctions, right? Secondly, now it's a very peculiar sort of situation, because on the one hand, the nuclear deal, the talks with regard to the revival of the nuclear deal seem dim, but US has given limited space to Venezuela and Iran to sell oil, and that is evident if you've seen the last, after the Ukraine crisis. Iran has been selling oil, Venezuela has been selling oil. So basically, I think both Iran and Venezuela are looking to find ways of countering, US sanctions. That's the larger perspective. In the context of bilateral relations, you know, Iran has already been helping Venezuela out with regard to the revival of some refineries and all that. That's all that is going on. But I think the message is not only for the US, for the West. While if you look at the speeches of Maduro and Raisi after the agreement, they referred to Western imperialism and they spoke about battling sanctions and so on and so forth. It's also that even countries which are within the Russia-China camp, they are also they cannot be totally dependent upon Moscow or Beijing. Now, simple example is like, so for instance, if you look at the Iran, China, Russia trilateral, in recent months, China stopped buying that much oil from Iran and they started purchasing oil from Russia, because it was available at cheaper prices. So every country is looking for alternatives. And even if you're part of that camp, and you do there is anti-West posturing and all, you have to have some, alternatives in place. So I think there is symbolic messaging in this. There is economic messaging, obviously, in terms of, because both sides are going to be, cooperation is good. The focus of the agreement is on finance, on energy, and even on people to people relations, cultural relations, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a very interesting sort of agreement, and both sides have also obviously taken a advantage, of the current situation, and this is also sort of hedging vis-a-vis both, obviously not just I mean, the if you look at the language vis-a-vis the West and all, it was quite evident that the tone was reasonably aggressive, but it is also posturing vis-a-vis China and Russia that we will find our own way. We will not be totally and that is given the current two important things, given the slowdown in China, and given the fact that Russia is dealing with its own problems. Countries that are part of that camp have to look for alternatives. So it's important in that context. And now the only thing which remains to be seen is that how will both countries also take advantage of some of the openings which the West and the US might give them, with regard to economic linkages with other countries and on so on. So that may make their job a bit simpler. But I think this is a very important development. And again, when you look at the great powers, look at China, you look at US, you look at Russia, these are very important developments. And obviously, these are important. I mean, so for instance, more than swing states now, we use the word swing states in IR, but Iran is a very important country. And so any agreement in any case, this sort of agreement is even more important, given, as I said, the fact that it needs to ensure that obviously it maintains maintains its posture of sort of anti-Western posture, while also not giving a message domestically that it doesn't have any other alternatives in place, and its foreign policy is totally dependent upon China. So I think a very important agreement, and more than the issues, more than some of the areas which have been highlighted, as I said, the symbolic and the geopolitical messaging is very important.
Speaking of Russia and its alternatives, right? Russia has allegedly in the process of inventing a new G8 nations after the economic breakup with US due to their sanctions. And first of all, there are countries, I think, including India, that they have in their mind to include in the new G8 environment. So, what do you think that entails for our country?
I think at this point of time, it's very, again, this statement has emanated from Russia, and this is again at this, it doesn't have any relevance, beyond some sort of messaging for the West or posturing. There is no doubt that obviously the Russian emphasis was on countries which have taken an independent stance, on the Ukraine issue. So obviously this includes India, this includes Mexico, this includes Indonesia as well. Indonesia
China, Mexico, I
China,
think, is
right?
also in the.
Now, but the point is that uh, all these countries who take an independent stance, are they willing now to put further political capital in any such organization? Because many a time such organizations are no more than acronyms. Because if you look at BRICS now, for instance, now while obviously India and Russia, their relations have warmed up again, but what about the India-China relationship at this point of time? Similarly, if you look at Brazil, where does it fit in, to BRICS? Now, I may mention that even earlier, an organization, there was, I think a few years ago, there was talk about the BRICS actually being a non-starter, and somebody had coined the term MINT, which basically meant Mexico, Indonesia, I think Nigeria, and Turkey. Right. So some of these countries, actually even Turkey, has also been recommended as one of the members of this G8. So I think obviously there could be areas where these countries could work together, but I don't think you have a number of such organizations floating around, and at a certain point of time, each country has to see how much they can invest. So for Russia, this could be important, but for other countries, they would rather work outside the umbrella of such an organization, because remember, some of these countries have a very even though they may have taken independent stance, they have to also strike a fine balance between the West and Russia. So it's an important, I mean, obviously from the Russian point of view, it's an important idea, but I don't think that maybe there are a couple of countries which have been recommended which may actually get closer to Russia and be part of such an organization. But as I said, there are already such avenues which are available. So I don't think you necessarily need. And as I said, many a times these such organizations end up in being mere, acronyms. So that is something which needs to be avoided.
And now moving on from the entire scenario of Southeast countries, let's come to US. The chief strategist for former US President Obama, David Axelrod, he said that Joe Biden's age can be a liability if he runs for the second term in 2024. Now, how do you think that will affect the entire political environment in the US?
So, a few things. First of all, Biden's challenges, as we know, I mean, they began last year. The first real challenge was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Some of the criticism which he faced domestically, more which he faced from allies. So that was the first test. And obviously, at that point of time, realism trumped morality. Biden has tried to instill, this dimension of morality into foreign policy. Though on key foreign policy issues, his approach has been similar to that of Trump. I mean, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the approach towards China, that has been similar, right? Now, what has happened in recent months? First of all, obviously, you had the Ukraine crisis. So that was a disruption for the economy. In the month of May, last month, a report came out which said that, inflation, basically in 40 years is the highest rate of inflation which the US has faced. Now you have midterms in November. So Biden has to ensure that, inflation is kept in check. And uh, even oil prices. So he's trying to make some course corrections in his foreign policy. As a result, he cannot ignore his low approval ratings, because I think if you look at his as far as handling of Ukraine, or handling of inflation and the economy and all, I think his approval ratings were below 30% in a poll which was published last week in the US, as it is. Now, this is important because I think this argument is that Biden has actually not handled certain things, whether you look at economy, whether you look at COVID, foreign policy is not only his doing. So he has not done that badly in certain areas. But the perception is such because, at times he doesn't seem in control. So that is the argument which is being made, that, and, by the time 2024 approaches, he's going to be, I think, 82. And by the time he ends the second term, he would be 86. Now, in the US system, I mean, that is a lot. So in terms of perception, I think the age factor is important. But I think more importantly, I think in the short run, I would also, I mean, the Democrats are also worried about, as it is, about the midterms in November. I mean, how are the economic challenges going to be dealt with? And that is why you see Biden willing to make a course correction with regard to ties with Saudi Arabia. He's going to be visiting Saudi Arabia next month, and Israel. And also he is willing to remove some of the tariffs vis-a-vis China of certain commodities so as to check inflation. Now, this is not to do with the foreign policy reset only. It's also about domestic politics, so that oil prices are kept in check, right? And as I had mentioned earlier also, as a result of the midterms in November, and the desire, obviously, of Biden to keep oil prices in check, you may see some concessions to Iran, irrespective of whether the deal is, whether there is a revival or not. So now the challenge is, first is the midterms. Second, you have to find, the real challenge is that if there's a perception that Biden has failed, will you see some of the fence sitters moving back to somebody who's more, supposedly decisive? And that was,
Exactly. Who do you think that can be? Who do you think is a possible
so
candidate?
will you see that happening? That's the first thing. Second is, in the Democrats also, to deal with, even if it's not Trump, if it's somebody else on the Republican side, do you have somebody because earlier you had Bernie Sanders. Now Bernie Sanders is also I think he's over 80. So do you have somebody like that who can counter this thing of, that establishment politicians can't deal with the challenges which the US is facing? So the challenges there are short term as well as long term. But I would also like to add at this point that in any case, very few people had thought that, though Biden has recently said that he will run for a second term, he's alluded to that at times, but very few people actually thought that given his age, he may, the common perception was that either Kamala Harris or somebody, that sort of thing will happen. So, but I think the bigger worry is about finding an alternative who can deal with the Trump onslaught that, establishment politicians can't deliver. You need somebody decisive, see what has happened, and somebody who can actually send out this message that it's not only because of the style of governance, but the situations were such. And in fact, in spite of those challenges, the US has not done that badly. What happens is that your perception, sometimes it's not that you performed that badly, but perception is very important. And you need somebody to articulate the fact that even if, let's say, you haven't performed well, you need to send out a message that irrespective of who is going to be there, any leader would have failed in those circumstances, but we have done our best, and we have performed far better. And you need to send out this message that a stable leader is needed, in times of crisis. He's far more reassuring, not just to the US, but the rest of the world. Now you need some leader like that. And you also need to now you don't necessarily, the Democrats will also have a challenge that they don't need to necessarily play to the agenda set by the Republicans, being isolationist on economic issues, following similar foreign. I think they also need to start setting the agenda. The worry also is now that because of a few failures here, they're beginning to lose a grip over the narrative. And it's not that Trump has recovered or something, that suddenly, all what happened not only during his presidency, but even afterwards, at the events of January 2021, that people have forgotten them. But you need somebody who can articulate that strongly from the Democrat side.
Right, right. So thank you so much for the information that you have given us today. Please join us next week on Global Chit Chat with Ridhivesh Singh Maini. Thank you so much, sir, again. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.